Progress does not stand still. Decades ago, a person could not even imagine that to see relatives on the other side of the world. It is enough just to take your pocket box and press a couple of simple combinations. And that's it. Now you can see the face of your loved one in this box, and there is no need to exchange letters in advance to arrange a meeting, and distances are covered much faster. Isn't that a miracle? Then tell me, why moving on the path of progress, having achieved such a leap in technical, scientific, and economic terms, society is more and more degraded in matters of culture, morality, and spirituality? The 21st century can be characterized as the century of mental illness. There has never been anything like it in the world. And all this is a consequence of the experiment in which humanity is now without even realizing it. For a better understanding of the paradox of our reality, I suggest looking at what is happening in our world through the eyes of Dr. Faust. Why Faust? In the analysis of the civilization of modernity as Faust's civilization, which was used by many authors already at the beginning of the X century, the civilization of Europe, the civilization of the West, I would say, the civilization of modernity. This is the civilization of Dr. Faustus. In my opinion, this is one of the most accurate descriptions and definitions which allows us to penetrate the essence of things. And the essence of it remains approximately the same at all times. It is transcendental motivation. Now, that is positioning oneself in time, those goals that are set about time-space among the creative elite, cultural elite, and political elite. Since we do not have the opportunity to touch these motivations directly, these are rather closed groups. We have to content ourselves with cultural artifacts, one of which, of course, is Goethe's Faust. Usually, everyone stops to tell us that an elderly scientist, having found his youth with the help of Satan, seduced a young girl, then beat her brother, and as a result she was executed. I think that few people go further, but the work is key. You have to start at the beginning. First of all, who is Faust? This is the embodiment of reason. That is, from the very beginning, it leads us to a very fundamental question. If we remember where the project of modernity begins, it begins essentially with a reassessment of the role of reason in human life, and the creation of a bit of a cult of reason. That is in the period from the XV century. This is the idea of reason with a capital letter, which with its light rays disperses the darkness of ignorance, reason that separates man from the animal world and creates from man this demigod or even God, depending on different authors of this epic. At the very beginning of Goethe's work, the mind shows its limitations. Here, in this respect, Goethe takes a very bold step, in my opinion, and he shows us that this Faust is not just a man, but a man who has reached the limits of knowledge a little bit too much. If you remember, at the beginning, he learned everything he could, including the secret occult sciences, which here, of course, is not accidental for Goethe. He has not yet kept hidden that element that is now generally ignored in the scientific community. But it must be realized that the connection between modern science and occultism is more than direct. All the classics of scientific endeavor from Newton to Bacon, none of them practiced pure science in the modern sense of the word. These people pursued mainly occult goals. They wanted power over the world. They wanted to communicate with demons. They wanted to control demons. They wanted to create alchemical different devices, and it was not by chance. I mean, again, now I often meet the opinion that these are simple prejudices, but here I am very interested in the paradox. That is, you simultaneously exalt these people as the greatest priests of your temple of reason, scientific thinking and other things, but at the same time you consider them village grandmothers full of prejudices. And here this image of Faust shows us a very simple thing from the very beginning. That reason by itself, no matter how much we would like it, it will not be self-sufficient. It will not fill a man. It will not give him answers to his transcendent queries. It is obvious that the protagonist, Faust, at the beginning of the work, feels a longing for knowledge. He even thinks of suicide. He does not know what to do, where to find meaning, or what to entertain himself with, and he is bored. Being in such a state of despondency expressed in the language of Christian concepts. And in this state, he calls the demons, well, and then actually begins the development of the plot. Yes, but this is a literary character, and if we translate it exactly to the history of philosophy, then here I repeat, for me it is each of the characters as a symbolic embodiment of this or that idea that is important. Here begins this Faustian demonstration of the limitations of reason from the position of reason itself. It is also characteristic of all European civilization. It is one of its deepest contradictions. That is, what did the Western civilization of modern times do? On what it got its strength and allowed it to dominate the whole world in essence? Of course, it was a turn to a material culture that no other civilization, perhaps except Rome, had ever done before. In a sense, Europe made a deal with the devil as a material gain. Any person who will familiarize himself with Aristotle and the like, it will be obvious that the people who inhabited the European continent before the modern age were anything but backward savages. It is a myth that Europe was some place of backwardness. Just look at the evolution of armor and the evolution of architecture. There are changes that Rome did not make for millennia. If you look at the structure of the Gothic cathedral in terms of architecture, it's innovated many times more than Rome did in its period. But it was a realm and a culture in which reason was extremely limited and limited in its goals. Reason was always limited by the good. Cognition was considered not as an end in itself, but as a means to achieve this or that good. And the highest good, of course, was the comprehension of God, the divine. What happens at the very beginning of modern civilization? Cognition is separated from the good. Cognition and reason are stripped of the need to limit themselves by ethics, aesthetics, notions of the proper, and notions of the right. The only criterion that more or less remains is the criterion of rational utility. That is, if it brings money or if it brings power, it is good. Why occultism is also important to mention here, because the approach assumes that knowledge is a way to gain power over the world. So if you used to know a way to God, now everything changes and knowledge is the power over the world and the material transformation of this world. And this is happening here at the very beginning of the New Age. If you read the founding fathers of the modern scientific project, the metaphors can be much harsher, because the main idea is power. Knowledge becomes an instrument of power, and this creates the success of Europe. It would seem that a very simple idea can be formulated in one sentence, but the scale of its revolutionary consequences we have seen for the last 400 years. When you know becoming an instrument of power, you have everything changing. Your structure of social relations changes, your motivation changes, and your idea of what is permissible, what should be, and what is possible changes. You have completely different ideas about resources. But in this context, you still have a big hole. And this hole is, why power for power's sake? Well, on a simple level, you can say that from my experience of communicating with people and from my reading. Very few people are willing to engage in power for power's sake. It is already necessary to possess such neglected psychopathy because no man for himself, first of all, will not explain his aspiration to power as a simple aspiration to satisfy his ego. So there arise needs of another order, and since you have abandoned the divine needs, you need to transform and transmute them, and hence there arise various modern Gnostic projects and knowledge. Projects in which knowledge merges with power for the sake of some transformation of the world into something else, and further different scenarios are possible. And on this path of transactions with occult dark forces as a metaphor, they are more than acceptable. I hope I have given you enough food for thought, and this is only the first part. I have more to say on this topic. Subscribe if you haven't already, and also write what you think about what brought humanity to where it is now, and what are the ways to reach another level of reality.